We take a look at one of Lexington's most iconic structures in this week's special edition of Lexington Now. I'm Neil Noah, and this is Lexington Now for the week of November 26, 2018. This is a special edition of Lexington Now, and we dedicate our time this week to the rededication of Lexington's iconic historic courthouse.
Well, near this very site, 243 years ago, 1 year before the Declaration of Independence itself was signed, our city, Lexington, was settled. 7 years later, in 1782, the city's first center of administration and justice was built, our first courthouse. 118 years later, in 1900, the courthouse we are rededicating today opened to the public. Fayette's new Temple of Justice, it was called. It was the fourth courthouse on this site. The great Kentucky statesman Henry Clay encouraged his early 19th century colleagues to think of Lexington not as a town or a village or a hamlet, but as a great American city. Clay admonished those same colleagues to ensure that public buildings reflected the values and ambitions of a sophisticated city and not just its momentary budget concerns. Clay knew that great buildings would last a century or more, in fact, perhaps forever. When this building opened, Lexington's reputation as the Athens of the West, as an intellectual and cultural center, was well established, and the building reflected our city's status. It truly was a temple, a dream of sumptuous beauty, according to an article in the Sunday Leader on February 4, 1900s. Fast forward another 118 years to today, and we are rededicating this temple after we came close to losing it to decay, decline, and neglect. We moved our court operations to a new courthouse in 2002, and since then, the problem of what to do with a rapidly declining signature symbol of our city weighed heavily on all of us. We tried on a variety of answers: an art or a history museum, a new city hall, or just give it up and tear it down. Believe me, there were those who wanted to do just that. As for me, this was a problem-solving exercise that yielded a reminder lesson. Don't make a decision about something new without knowing what to do with something historic. We knew the good bones were here, but the bones had to be rearranged into something modern, inviting, and compelling. Whatever we did here needed to be a beacon for the future and not just a curio of the past. Finding the right answers took vision and imagination and determination. Something new altogether had to be imagined and conceived without losing the history this building represents. Why? Because, as Dr. Thomas Clark once said, because a community without a sense of history is no community at all. Lexington is fortunate. We have a rich history, and the buildings have stood on this site. All those buildings reflect that history. Today we are here to consecrate that history. Courthouse Square is a solution that rekindles the spirit of the Athens of the West for a new millennium. We're standing here today as witnesses to a project that was hard and tough to imagine, tougher more to fund and finance. We are standing here today as witnesses to a project that represents nothing short of a miracle. Courthouse Square is Lexington and Kentucky proud. Home to the Breeders' Cup today, a bourbon bar, a farm-to-table restaurant, and our visitor center. It is an animated and engaged space, more so now than ever before. And it welcomes everyone. A place that in the past often held difficult and troubling memories is now a place where all people can go to create memories, weddings, celebrations, gatherings. Yes, in many respects, today's rededication represents our city's renaissance, a renaissance of both spirit and place, a renaissance of Lexington, our great American city. Nothing short of a miracle and demonstrating that dreams can come true. Holly Wiedemann and Deborah Burke and Kay Norman Berry and their firms did an extraordinary job. They literally not just designed this space, but they curated this space. And Holly is here to tell us more about that process. Holly Wiedemann.
How do you describe vision? How do you describe imagination? How do you define placemaking? How do you create a bold and vibrant city? Exhibit A, Jim Gray. It may have been his Loeb Fellowship at Harvard that truly prepared him for this moment. If you look at the accomplishments that have occurred within his term, you will see the town branch, the expanded civic center, and the redefinition of RUP, but perhaps most importantly, the reimagination of a city center, and you see it here today. In the spirit of Thanksgiving, we can all give thanks for this fabulous building, first built in 1898 and now rededicated in 2018. It makes the city sing. It is the culmination of multiple minds, the vision of many, the perseverance of a few, and that soon became the majority. We can all be proud of what this means to generations before us and now generations after us. It will be in the enduring structure that has spanned centuries and lives forever as a testament to vision, imagination, and persistence. This building saw much in its first 100 years, and it will see much in its next 100. Thank you for being the opportunity to be a part of an amazing team that remade this for the next generations. Thank you to all the individuals and firms who gave their best every day to get this project across the finish line under extremely tight deadlines. Thanks to our investor, Old National Bank, who funded the equity of the historic tax credits. As a quick aside, I must tell you that during construction, I had the great joy of taking lots of tours through. At one time, I got the honor of taking 7 judges through, including Judge Mary Noble. I'm happy to tell you that I have not, at least till yet, been in the occasion to be in front of multiple judges before, and this was a first. When I took them through during the construction, one of them reminisced about the location of the law library. Another said he didn't recall that the location was there. Several others pointed out that perhaps he had not darkened the door of the library during their respective tenures. I tried to impress upon them my name in case I ever was in trouble and they needed to bail me out. They all proclaimed that the rule of law would prevail, and I had no likelihood of preferential treatment. I still think that was one of the most amusing tours I gave during construction. I would like to thank the incredible team that I had the great fortune to be a part of these past 3 years. Thanks to each and every one of you, and you know who you are. Thank you.
Well, Holly's already told a story on Justice Noble, but that gives me the opportunity then to say that we are honored today to have so many of those who have served at one time or another in this courthouse, and representing them and speaking next and finally before our ribbon cutting is Justice Mary Noble. Justice Noble.
Well, it's an unenviable position to be the last speaker when it's as cold as it is today. I am Justice Mary Noble. I've been recently and ably succeeded by one of my former judicial colleagues, Justice Larry Van Meter, who's here representing the Kentucky Supreme Court today for this event. because this building behind us for over 100 years was a courthouse overseeing the law of this Commonwealth and the law of this country, hearing claims of all kinds, from the most depraved criminal cases to the joyous moment when a parent adopted a new baby. We saw the ups, the downs, the ins, the outs of life, and literally hundreds of thousands of people have passed through the halls of this building over that period of time, seeking, and we tried to assure, finding justice. It was an important thing to do for our life's calling and our life's work, and the building around us made us feel the weight of everything that we did. It was a wonderful building in its initial inception, and you can probably tell I'm here for the history part of this today, because it was spacious, it was open, it was the first fully electrified public building in this city. It had lights that you will see when you look at the dome, up there lighting the dome, and it was a moment of awe. When you stepped in, you looked up and you saw it. But this city grew, and as it grew, we added judges, and as we added judges, we needed space. And in 1960, a renovation was done that just was awful. It was effective because it provided the space that we needed, but it was not terribly aesthetic, and I think we can all agree about that. But even that was not to last, and as time went on, we added more judges. Judge Sheila Isaac had to have an office where we walled off a hallway, and she made the best of it. We added more judges because we had more and more cases as our city grew. And finally, it became the situation where we simply really could not function in this building anymore. When we would bring prisoners from jail, they'd sit in the hallways so that the people, the families coming into the courtroom, the judges themselves would have to walk between a row of people they were later going to send to prison for a significant period of time. The holdover simply couldn't hold them all. And we really needed other courtrooms, and so it became time for us to move. It was one of the saddest moments because as someone who also practiced law here, I can tell you, it's an indelible moment for me, and I'm sure it is for every other lawyer, the first time they ever appeared in Fayette Circuit Court. And they saw the brilliant lawyers working on their cases. They saw the excellent judges, the history of the judges that were here, and it just made you feel something about being a participant in this process that was precious. So we have that memory. But it is important to note today that this is a rededication, not a dedication, because this building was dedicated to observing and preserving and passing on the law for over 100 years. But today, on this rededication, it becomes something new. And there is something extremely satisfying to me in recognizing that, yes, sometimes old buildings and old structures do have to make way for progress. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes you can find the way to repurpose them in such a way that the history is preserved, that this wonderful, incredibly unique, one of the few of its kind in the country, buildings can be preserved and continue to be this jewel for all of Lexington and Fayette County. And for your children, for the school kids who come in and tour this building. All of this is so satisfying to know that sometimes the old must make way for the new, but sometimes the old can become the new and be the type of building that has this multi-use structure that we see here today. And I can speak for myself, and I think for all of my former colleagues, we're so glad it's still here. Enjoy this building.
Okay, thank you all for hanging with us for so long, and now we're ready for the fun. Kenny, we've got a bunch of scissors, right? So we've got as many scissors as we've got folks here.
In 3, 2, 1.
After the break, we'll travel back in time to take a look at the last 100 years and look toward the next century of our historic courthouse.
I'm Sergeant Randall Combs with the Lexington Police Traffic Unit. Accessible parking is a valuable and necessary resource for people with disabilities, and that includes the striped area next to accessible parking spots. These are access aisles, and it is illegal to park here, even if you have an accessible parking permit.
Access aisles are necessary for me to get into my vehicle. They are there because many of us need that space to use our ramps or to transfer into a wheelchair. It's frustrating when a car is parked in the access aisle because I don't have room to get into my van.
Police and Lex Park are writing tickets when they see vehicles parked in an access aisle, and the fine is $250. Know where and where not to park. Keep the access aisles clear. Thank you and drive safe.
We have an abundance of beauty and natural resources here in the Bluegrass. More miles of running water than any state in the continental U.S. You may not know it, but all our creeks and streams catch water directly from storm sewers on our streets. That means when someone tosses a cigarette butt on Main or Vine, chances are good it'll end up in Town Branch. Leave some pet waste on a sidewalk near Versailles Road, it goes into Wolf Run Creek. So please, don't trash the Bluegrass.
Welcome back to Lexington Now. In our first segment, we took part in the rededication of the historic courthouse. And now we take a look back at 100 years of history and look toward the next century of Lexington's historic courthouse.
This magnificent building has been at the very heart of civic life in Lexington since 1900. Its magnificent dome is an enduring symbol of our city, strong and firmly at the core of Lexington spirit. For more than a century, the courthouse has been a witness as citizens spoke out on the issue of the day, gathered on the courthouse square to rally for women's suffrage, to mourn President Franklin Roosevelt, to read the Declaration of Independence, to sing Christmas carols, to watch a military troop parade, or enjoy a game of marbles. Well, we almost lost it, but the public spoke out, telling all of us who would listen that they wanted to save this rapidly declining building, and we listened. In 2015, members of the council voted to approve my plan to save the courthouse, using a public-private partnership to restore the building and give it new life. Now it's time for celebration as we rededicate the Lexington Historic Courthouse at Courthouse Square, a grand public space.
For 102 years, the people of Fayette County sought justice at the corner of Main and Upper Streets. When it opened, the newspaper of the day proclaimed it Lexington's new state-of-the-art Temple of Justice. It had one handsome courtroom with arched windows, stained glass, and an ornate ceiling. Between 1992 and 2002, former Supreme Court Justice Mary Noble practiced law and served as a judge in the Main Street Courthouse. But by the time she arrived, it was no longer state-of-the-art.
When it was built, I know that it was state-of-the-art, but by the time I got to it, it was getting a little tired, a little decrepit in some places, but we still loved it and we loved being there.
The modern courtroom didn't compare to the grandeur of the original.
And while it was small, and while it was a little tight, and while it got worse as the years went on, as the numbers of people coming to the courthouse condensed what you could do there, there was always this feeling about being there where people actually had to cooperate because space was tight. You had to be respectful of others, and you had to show appreciation for the courtesy that others gave you. It was a very great experience for a young lawyer and a young judicial person. Throughout the years, though, as you can imagine, as cases got more and more voluminous, the courthouse seemed to get smaller and smaller and smaller. We had something for criminal court called holding cells. Those were actually little mini prisons in the courthouse where people would be brought over from the jails who had been charged with crimes, and they would be placed in these holding cells until their case could be called for criminal court. The cells were very, very small, and our criminal dockets got larger and larger. And so after a time, you simply could not put all the waiting defendants in the holding cells. It became a dilemma. Where do you put them? Some of the judges brought them in, set them in the jury boxes. Other judges lined chairs up out in the hallways and set them in the chairs in the hallways. So if you were a litigant or a prosecutor or a defense attorney or the judge going to another courtroom, you'd have to make your way between the rows of prisoners sitting in the hallway. You had to work around that building. Literally had to work around that building. And yet, in doing it, while we might gripe and complain, it's kind of funny because we were proud of our building. We were always proud of our building because there is history there. It's the 5th courthouse for Lexington, the 3rd on that site. And we felt that history and really never thought about wanting to go anywhere else. When there was not enough space for district court and district court was placed in another building, that kind of separated the courts and the court function. And we really just did not want to be moved. But we outgrew the building.
The decision of whether or not to renovate the courthouse, with its prominent location in the very heart of Lexington, had been weighing on City Hall for many years. In his 2014 campaign for re-election, Mayor Jim Gray asked citizens for their thoughts about the building. The response was clear: save the building, restore it, and give it new life. The city hired Holly Wiedemann with AU Associates to manage the project.
And as time evolved, thanks to Mayor Gray, the vision really gelled because of the importance of this building as the nexus of downtown. It's even built in a way that has a north, south, west, and east, and it radiates its inclusion and its center focus of Lexington. So having been born here, and our family's department store right down the street, Purcell's, I passed this courthouse many, many, many times as a child growing up and throughout my life, and it's such an important building.
The mayor was interested in a public-private partnership, choosing to involve the private sector rather than go it alone with public dollars. The city used historic tax credits to bring in funding from the private sector. In the end, it was a 4-year, $32 million project. Work on the outside included cleaning the stone and renovating the copper-clad cupola and the weather vane. Inside, architects approached the project with a respect for history, but also with a touch of creativity that lends itself to today and the future. The most difficult challenges stemmed from a remodeling effort in the 1960s that closed the dome to the public.
You did not know what the inside of the tower or the dome looked like because there had been a renovation in the 60s that had created the 4th floor and had totally closed off all of that beautiful molding, the walk around up at the top, and the inside of the dome. That had been completely closed off, and frankly, by that time, no one even knew it was up there. As chief judge, the court administrator came to me one day and he said, "Judge Noble, I think you need to come up and take a look at this boiler." And I'm saying, I know so much about boilers. How can I help you, Donnie? "Oh, but I think you need to come up here and see this." So we went up a hidden flight of stairs, turned a corner, went up a little ladder, and all of a sudden it was like I was in underground Atlanta, because you were sitting there looking up at this gorgeous dome and all of these moldings and the arched walkway around the top of the dome tower, and you thought, my goodness, I didn't know this was here. And then you turned around, and in the middle of the space was this large elevator shaft and a big old industrial level boiler. I said, "Okay, Mr. Taylor, I see it. Now what do you want me to do about it?" He said, "Well, Judge Noble, I just thought you ought to know it's kind of running on bubble gum and a prayer." And he was right about that. All of the equipment, all of the support systems in that courthouse were, of course, as old as the courthouse almost, or at least from the 1960s renovation.
Our part was to come in and essentially gut the center part of the building, if you will, undo everything that was done in the 1960s and restore it to its original grandeur at the dome, and to add the openings in the floors and the stairwell at the ground floor. So early on in the demolition, we did uncover there was quite a bit of destruction in the 1960s renovation, and we uncovered several of the areas that the new renovation needed to address to make the building structurally sound. There was a column at the top that was in dire need. It's a wonder that the bell had not fallen through.
The structural aspects within the rotunda were challenging, to say the least, because of all the HVAC equipment that had been stored there. And the vents, the return air vents, where the windows had been filled in of the windows in the cupola and the rotunda. So all of that, when we removed it, it was beautiful to behold. And the fact that that is now a light-filled, gorgeous crowning of this beautiful building that is restored to its original glory is pretty exciting.
When the dome reopened in February 2018, it had been out of the public sight for 58 years. Visitors to the building today can once again stand on the ground floor and look up to the lights in the dome, now through glass floors. As the renovation progressed, the building revealed wonderful secrets. There were faces everywhere, carved into the stone or created in plaster, including some hidden in recesses in the dome. Practice for the masons.
You know, the faces on the building are truly a mystery, the solution to which is no doubt lost in time. But there's been a lot of speculation about them. Who are these people? Why were they placed there? And I don't think anybody has ever found any accurate data about these carvings. But for me, the way I always viewed those faces on the building is it marked it as the people's building. You had people all over that building, always. It was the people's building. So how wonderful it is now that it can be used as a people's building for the whole good of Fayette County. It seems to me to be the perfect use of that building with all those faces.
And the work exposed some of the original load-bearing brickwork, including handsome arches that support the dome. The brickwork was done by Tandy & Bird, a large masonry firm owned and operated by Henry A. Tandy and Alfred Bird, both prominent African Americans in Lexington. Our town square, including the courthouse and Cheapside, has always been space owned by the public. The area, once bordered by public streets on 4 sides, was set aside by Lexington's trustees in 1780 as public space for a market and a courthouse.
So we have a rich history, and it evolves around our town, our community, our public space, Cheapside, and the courthouse. And I go back to this all the time. It's the public space. No one individual ever owned any piece of our public space. There had buildings and businesses around them that people owned, but nobody can produce a deed that says, I own this little corner of Cheapside.
Trustees established the market because they realized the public needed a space in town where they could bring livestock, produce, anything they had to sell, including the enslaved. Lexington was a prominent slave market in the South because so many slave dealers were based here.
We had 24 slave dealers. Again, J. Winston Coleman, in his book, documented, he actually listed all of the slave dealers that were operating in and around Lexington. We had probably 6 jails, and that was where they held the enslaved. Within the downtown core,
the Cheapside slave sales took place utilizing an auction block located near Main Street in the vicinity of the space a statue of John Breckinridge recently stood. Breckinridge was a Confederate general who had previously served as Vice President of the United States and then Confederate Secretary of War. Breckinridge and fellow Confederate General John Hunt Morgan, whose statue was located in front of the courthouse near the corner of Main and Upper Streets, both owned slaves. The Breckinridge statue stood on Cheapside for 130 years. Morgan, on horseback, sat on the courthouse front lawn for 106 years. Erected after the Civil War, many now see both statues as symbols of an attempt at revisionist history by groups hoping to glorify the Confederacy. But then came October 17, 2017, when both statues were moved, first to storage and then on July 24, 2018, to a permanent home in the Lexington Cemetery. The city relocated the statues after a long public debate. Over the course of 18 months, DeBron Thomas, a young musician from California whose family has roots in Lexington, and a group called Take Back Cheapside patiently and persistently convinced the city that it was not right to honor two men who fought to keep slavery on the same ground where so many slaves were sold.
But from the first meeting that we had with the city, and we learned the road that it was going to take to have those statues relocated, that was when I really started to believe that this can happen, because I can see it. So I think it's really, really great, and it's something that we as a city should be proud of, and that this was something that happened because of the power of people, and it also happened because our elected officials did their jobs and more. So the monuments being in that space where they were in the site of a former slave auction block was not an appropriate place, and I really felt that it was if we could have been successful, it would have been a way to allow folks to really feel hope when there's such a time of hopelessness.
In this quiet, respectful place, those who want to visit the statues will see them in a setting that offers opportunities to learn more about Lexington history. Both men are buried at the cemetery, along with many others who served in the Confederate Army. The cemetery is also home to Union soldiers. Like the entire state of Kentucky, Lexington's loyalties were divided in the Civil War. The courthouse is a little world within itself, with almost every convenience within its walls, except a restaurant. So wrote the Sunday Lexington Leader on February 4, 1900, as it introduced the community to its new courthouse. Now, as we rededicate the building in 2018, there are no courts inside, but there is a restaurant, a bourbon bar, a public event space, a visitor center, and offices. The restoration of the courthouse is a public-private partnership. The ongoing cost of the operation of the building will be funded through the rents paid by tenants. The rotunda, Limestone Hall, is leased to Lex Effect, an event management company. Demand for the space has been through the roof since the company began booking events in February 2018. With local tourism booming, the new visitor center is tech-savvy with interactive exhibits. There's also a place to smell the bourbon from nearby distilleries. Visit Lex, which operates the visitor center, also has its offices inside the courthouse, as does the Breeders' Cup. The success of the 2015 Breeders' Cup, which Lexington hosted, prompted the organization to move its headquarters from the Lexington suburbs to the center of downtown. The restaurant, Zim's Cafe, and the bar, the Thirsty Fox at Zim's Cafe, are both owned and operated by outstanding restaurateur Ouida Michael, the leader of farm-to-table dining in the Bluegrass.
I grew up in Lexington, and this building to me was always the center of our community. It was where I felt like all kinds of mysteries were resolved and happening, and it was sort of the square, the center square of town. Then the farmers market moved here, so I was just thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to open a restaurant in such an iconic location. Looking at the courthouse and its restaurant potential before we made the decision to come to the courthouse, I felt like the farmers market associated with Cheapside right outside the doors of Zim's Cafe was one of the chief reasons I wanted to open the restaurant. And it's back to sort of this magic investment that the city first made when they first built this building, with the clock and the lights and the weather vane. And I think for Zim's Cafe to be a part of that, with its folk art and its color and its, local vegetables and local hamburgers and families and kids running around through this, is just the most amazing thing for Lexington, and I'm very proud to be a part of it.
As we rededicate this historic courthouse, we welcome you to a grand public space that welcomes everyone and celebrates Lexington, our great American city.
Here's a preview of this week's Lex TV meeting coverage with Chris Edwards coming from the council chamber to give us a look at what we're covering. Chris, what do we have this week?
Thanks, Neil. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. We have just a few meetings to tell you about that will be live here on Lex TV this week, starting with the 1 p.m. Council Budget, Finance, and Economic Committee meeting at 1 p.m. on Tuesday, followed by the 3 p.m. Council Work Session. The only other meeting we have this week will be the 1:30 p.m. Planning Commission meeting, which will be live out of this chamber. Now, next week is going to be very busy here at Lex TV with lots of meetings to televise. We have the usual committee meeting on Tuesday and the usual work session. But on December 4th, that Tuesday, we'll also have the first of December's formal council meetings. They have to have 2 a month. The first one will be at 5 p.m. on December 4th here in this chambers. The second formal council meeting will be on December 6th at the usual 6 p.m. time. And this will be it for the council until they come back from break on January 15th. One thing you want to keep tuned to on Lex TV is Mayor-elect Linda Gorton's inauguration. We don't know when that's going to be or where it's going to be just yet, but as soon as we find out here on Lex TV, we'll be sure to let you know. Neil, back to you.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you for tuning in. That's all for this week, and you can keep up with us on social media and check out the latest traffic updates on Twitter at LexRec, or catch our live traffic cams on LexingtonKY.gov. For the staff and producers at Lex TV, I'm Neil Noah, and that's it for now.